your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
Hey, good evening, horror fans. Welcome to another edition of the Weekly Horoscope. I'm your host, Jerry, here with my partner, Matt. And Matt, what a perfect topic for tonight as I'm sitting here in the pouring rain with thunder and lightning. Our topic is dark and stormy nights, a classic line from literature in the 1800s and then made famous by that fantastic writer, Snoopy, that we all know of. But what do you think of this subject here?
Yeah, I think it's awesome. Storms represent the chaos that ensues in our lives. We'll often say things like, we have to, brave through the storm or something of that nature. And, even in biblical or ancient texts, we see floods as being the ruin of society for the sins of mankind as a kind of punishment or type of reconciliation for all that we've done wrong. So it often lends itself to be a really good underlying theme for any horror movie.
Yeah, the power of nature is it always wants to remind us that it's in control, not us.
Yeah, I mean, and even when you're in nature, if you were just to be thrown on an island somewhere, you'd be kind of in chaos, right?
For sure. This week it brings us two very diverse and very different films. Something we like to do is try to look at this same subject from different perspectives and not have like two exact same films. And I think this week the dynamic is definitely here. What would you think of these films in general?
I had not seen either of these films before, but I enjoyed them both. I thought they had really good twists, very different narrative styles. They're also, for 14 years apart, which is, it's a complete different generation. But I enjoyed them both.
All right, we're going to start. Our first film of the night is a movie called Dark Water from 2002, directed by Hideo Nakata, who was the director of the original Ringu that was remade in America as The Ring. And this falls right in the middle of the J horror craze between the late 90s, early 2000s, where they seemed to produce all the effective horror films, and America had kind of gotten stale.
Yeah, it definitely has that style from The Ring. When I was watching this movie, at one point I was thinking, this is a different kind of category. This almost seemed like an emotional horror movie. This movie deals with a lot of, thematically deals with, regret, and dealing with the trauma and like the past trauma and how our past can like haunt us and how we deal with that and how that can become generational, right? How trauma can become generational in a family and how you kind of pass that along.
Yeah, very true. Our movie starts with a heavy rain, just like out my window right now. And there's a flashback to a young Yoshimi being left at school. And as an adult now, Yoshimi is going through a divorce and fighting for custody of her daughter, Ikuko. And in the initial meetings with lawyers, they bring up psych issues that she may have had in the past. And I always feel like this is always planted as a seed so that you never know, is what you're seeing real or is this a figment of the person's imagination?
Yeah, they do a good job with her character as far as like trying to figure out like is she crazy throughout the movie? Is she losing her mind, or is there other forces that are at play?
Yeah, Yoshimi starts to look for a place for them to live, and she finds a somewhat run-down apartment complex. They go to look at the place, and there's puddles of water on the elevator. This movie feels like it takes place in Seattle. There's constant rain, and there's just wet everywhere. Interestingly, going up the elevator, she's holding her hand out and feels as if someone is holding her hand while they ride the elevator. And the elevator opens, and Ikuko runs off ahead of her, and she looks down like, who was holding my hand? It reminded me of a movie we just covered, The Haunting from 1963, with the, who's holding my hand in the middle of the night kind of thing, which, I always find that creepy.
Yeah, actually, you know what? I thought of The Haunting when I was watching this movie as well. That was kind of funny, like because I was thinking of the less is more. When I'm, throughout this movie, I feel like they did a lot with a little. They didn't try to do a lot of graphic stuff. It was all like very like how things were placed and like the timing of the shots.
Yeah. They go into the apartment. It's dingy. It's a little run down, but it appears she's a woman with not a lot of options, so she takes it. And Ikuko is now missing, and she's looking all over for her. She runs up and finds her on the roof, and she's holding a red backpack that she found there. And the red backpack becomes symbolic. This film is shot through a lot of grays, a lot of blues. It's very dark, and the red backpack like symbolically jumps out every time it's on the screen for just the contrast it provides.
Yeah, it's very gloomy, and you can kind of like take the ride with the mother's like emotional descent throughout the entire movie as she's kind of like starts to turn into a panic like every scene.
They show them moving in, and they're laughing and playing together, and they're wrestling on the bed, and it's kind of an interjection of real life into this story where like this is just a mother, this is just their daughter. They have a connection, they have this real life outside of this trauma we're going to witness. It was a nice moment, but then she looks up and notices a water stain on the roof that is on the ceiling that is leaking pretty heavily into the apartment.
Yeah, and anyone who's a homeowner knows that's emotionally damaging no matter what.
Yeah, when we're watching it, I said, oh, yeah, my wife would find any crack or discoloration. I'm like, oh, you would have caught that 2 seconds into the place. But yeah, it's water's a problem.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, oh great, we need a new roof. There's 10 grand, 20.
So they go to the superintendent, who is no help whatsoever, kind of the response you might expect from a rundown apartment complex. And they show a scene. To me, the grossest scene in the movie was she turns on the faucet and gets a glass of drinking water, and she drinks it, and it has a funny taste, and there's a black hair floating in it. And that to me was just like, if you start to play
Yeah.
out the implications, like, oh, that's really skeezy.
Yeah, yeah, it was. And it goes back to the less is more because even though that's a simple trick to do on film, I was like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. Ikuko gets a new school. They're trying to settle in. Yoshimi's taking out the trash, and she encounters the backpack once again. And it's like, okay. I thought this was at the lost and found. Now it's in the trash.
Right. I mean, and which is enough to really I mean, that would creep me out. Like if you start seeing it in different places.
Yeah, for sure. The water stain is now growing, and she has a vision, sees a glimpse of a girl in a raincoat, and then she goes around and looks, but no one's there. That's kind of a recurring theme. We see this girl in the raincoat, always in glimpse, always in shadow, and then whenever you go to investigate, there's no one there.
And you can't see your face, so she's kind of like this faceless girl.
Right. Uh, she goes for a job interview, and it's kind of the most ridiculous job interview ever. The person interviewing her leaves the door open and is continually called out into the office to deal with problems. And she ends up late to pick up Ikuko from school. And there's a recurring theme about we saw it at the beginning with Yoshimi. And my first thought here, honestly, was like, if you suffered that trauma as a child, you're not going to inflict that trauma on your child. Right?
Right.
That just seems like counterintuitive, but that's what happens. And it's the kind of recurring theme in the movie.
Yeah, well, going back to, the generational drama, like how it's kind of passed down.
Yeah. Outside of school, she sees a missing girl poster for Mitsuko, who looks like the girl she keeps seeing. And of course, we know going in kind of the premise of the movie, so we've already put it together at this point. The father had picked up Ikuko because she was late, And again, they fight over her. And the mom takes her home, and there's a touching moment where they're walking home holding hands, and she says to her mother that all I need in this world is you. Something to that effect. And it was really touching to somebody who was going through struggles to have that kind of connection.
This is actually right here at this moment in the movie is kind of when I started to raise my eyebrows a little bit about something's going on, because the mother says, I don't need anyone but you. And then the mother looks at her and says, I can handle anything as long as you're with me. And I thought, well, that's an interesting thing to say to a child, because that's kind of like that Oedipal mother complex, right? Like basically, like you're not allowing your child to grow up. You're saying, I'll be fine as long as you stick with me. Don't ever grow up. Don't ever leave, right? That's kind of the seed you're planting with your child, which I thought was interesting. I thought psychologically, I thought that was a very interesting thing to say to your child, like in a damaging way. Like, and so right then and there, like I'm kind of like, okay, there's something going on with the mother psychologically here, right? That's not good. And so we'll kind of see that play out.
Yeah, and you're also interjecting her into the middle of your custody battle.
Exactly.
You've kind of put, it's not her decision. She's a child. You've kind of put this pressure now on her for an outcome she has no control over.
Right. Yeah. It's an emotionally damaging thing you can pass on to a child. When my son was 6, I was like, get a job.
Kids in other countries do it. Hey, you could be making me Nikes. Get to work.
Get to work. Fix this roof.
Yoshimi sees the girl again, and she goes up to the roof, and the backpack is there again. And now that's the moment, because like, okay, lost and found, maybe the apartment just didn't want to deal with it and just shot it out. So those two occurrences you can kind of string together. Now that it's back on the roof, it's like, okay, there's something else at play here.
Yeah, I would have shut that door and be like, we got to go.
Yeah. Yeah, true. At school, Ikuko's playing hide and seek, and she's hiding in a back corner. One thing I noticed about this school is every time they show school, there's no schoolwork. All the kids do is play all day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess it's kindergarten, right? I don't know.
But that's not how kindergarten is now.
Like, no, yeah, I don't even. I just remember. I remember kindergarten just being coloring and songs.
She sees the feet of a girl slowly walking towards her, and with the footsteps, there's a puddle of water that's spreading as this girl walks, and she faints. And now
she's traumatized and kind of has to go to the nurse's office, and looks like she has a fever.
Yeah, we cut back to the lawyers or the judge's quarters, and Yoshimi starts to lose control, and she really kind of makes herself look a little bit crazy and bad to this committee that's interviewing both parties. And a lawyer steps in to help her, and he says to her, like, you're not going to keep custody of your daughter if you can't keep yourself under control. And he kind of sets out to help her, and he's an ally in all of her battles, really.
Yeah, I thought it was actually an interesting part of the movie. It kind of, I liked it because when he kind of comes in later and helps try to explain things logically, I thought it was well written.
At home, Ikiko's still in bed, and Yoshimi is kind of like laying with her, like just wants to be with her daughter. And she has a dream or a flashback that she sees Mitsuko walking home alone in the rain. And she wakes to the bed is just soaked. The water stain has spread all across the ceiling, and the bed is just soaked with water. She's wet, but no Ikuko. Ikuko's gone. This time she immediately goes to check the roof, where she sees the backpack once again and sees a girl by the water tower. But she doesn't find Ikuko. So going down, she sees the apartment above her. There's water gushing out of the front door, and she decides to try to go in, and the door opens and she goes in. In this apartment, all of the faucets are turned wide open, and water's just running throughout the place.
It's just completely flooded. Yeah.
And she finds Ikuko and decides that they need to leave. And she believes that whoever this girl is trying to take Ikuko from her. So finally comes to the conclusion that we would have came to: get out.
Yeah, just leave. And so she does. I mean, she starts packing all her stuff up.
Her lawyer actually convinces her to stay because he's saying it's going to show real instability. You're going to move her to another school. And she's telling him all the issues. And he actually goes to the superintendent and the building manager and starts pointing out all the problems and forces them to fix it.
I like this part of the movie because it's the good juxtaposition of like the rational mind and her losing her mind. So it kind of like switches the audience's like narrative. Like, wait, maybe she is just losing her mind. Maybe this isn't a supernatural thing. Maybe there's a psychological thing going on. So it's kind of like the lawyer coming in and trying to set all the facts straight. I think does a good job to kind of like swing the audience's like idea of what's actually happening in the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. So she stays. Again, she finds the bag and now has a vision of the Mitsuko in water. And she's starting to like piece things together. She goes to the roof and she kind of lays against the steps by the water tower, the water tank, and she has a vision of her climbing, dropping her bag, and falling into the tank, trying to retrieve it. So she climbs up and notes that the tank has not been cleaned since the girl went missing. And at this point, my mind would immediately go back to that glass of water I drank and be sick to my stomach.
Yeah, I mean, even the fact that it hasn't been cleaned in 2 years because the girls were missing for 2 years.
Yeah.
This water's a little crunchy.
Yeah. It's really nasty.
Yeah.
Back in the apartment, Ikuko's in the apartment alone. All the water turns on. And she gets up and goes into the bathroom, and the sink's on, the tub's on. The water in the tub is black.
Yeah.
And we see Mitsuko's gray, dead hands and arms reach out of the water and pull her head down. And like she was going to try to drown her.
Like she was trying to drown her, yeah. And I mean, if this kid hasn't had enough trauma being left at school, after hours, she has to come home to this.
Yeah. Yoshimi runs back into the apartment. She finds Ikuko on the floor. She's wet, but she's alive. And she's like, we're out of here. She picks her up and she starts to leave. They get into the elevator, and the elevator is leaking water from all directions. And it actually short circuits. So they stop. And at this point, Yoshimi sees a girl walking out of the apartment and down the hallway. And as she gets closer, she realizes it's Ikuko. And she looks down and she's carrying Mitsuko, who attaches to her almost like it's like a hug around the shoulders, but it's almost symbolic, like an attachment.
Yeah,
like she's become part of her.
Yeah. Yeah, and she has this like zombified look to her. Like it's not just a regular looking child.
So we see kind of a realization come over Yoshimi, and she decides that she has to sacrifice herself to save her daughter. And she allows Mitsuko to claim her as her mother, and the elevator starts filling with water. And it's really tragic to leave this young girl just abandoned. And I know she thinks she's protecting her, and maybe she is, but it's quick to come to that conclusion. You think about having kids, and would you bail on your child so quickly? It seems not.
Right. Yeah. It's a very intense scene that kind of like leaves you thinking with a lot, but then kind of moves on to the next thing. I think this movie is very dense with meaning. I'd have to watch it. I'd have to run through this whole movie again to kind of really like try to pick up on more stuff. But what it seemed like, yeah, it was part of that generational drama that she was trying to like maybe protect or change, or maybe she was trying to right a wrong from the past and didn't want it to happen again. But by abandoning her child, it is happening again. So it's kind of like the cycle keeps happening.
Yeah. We move 10 years later and we see a high school aged Ikuko, and she visits the old apartment complex. At this point, it's run down and abandoned. She goes in and she finds her old apartment, and she goes in and it looks exactly as it did when she left. And her mother is there and appears exactly the same as she did when we last saw her.
Yep.
They talk, and Ikuko tells her she misses her and she wants to live with her again. And she says, "I'm sorry, we cannot be together." And then Mitsuko, child image of Mitsuko, appears over Ikuko's shoulder in the background. And then she turns, and both Mitsuko and her mother are gone. Both ghosts have disappeared, and she's again alone in the apartment. And
Yeah, she kind of cries. She cries like a little child for a second, and like she kind of becomes a child again, like emotionally.
yeah, it's thrown back to that moment of abandonment that she already suffered once and just had to relive.
Yeah.
So this is this was an interesting movie. It was a little slow at times, I thought.
Yeah.
Um, there wasn't a lot of action. I didn't think, I hear ghost story, and I'm expecting a certain level of creepiness that that wasn't really there. I'm not going to say it wasn't interesting, but it's kind of a slow burn, and not it's intense emotionally, but not intense action wise, if that makes sense.
I agree 100%. I thought the same thing. I think conceptually it's a really cool movie. They didn't really ruin it. I think they took the content that they had, and they did a good job making it. Like there's no like annoying jump scares in the movie. It doesn't try to be something it's not. That's why I said in the beginning, I think this is like an emotional horror movie.
Yeah, that describes it very, very well. Okay, our second film on Dark and Stormy Night is The Autopsy of Jane Doe from 2016, directed by Andre Overdahl, who went on to direct Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, based on Guillermo del Toro's appreciation for this film.
Mm.
We start at a bloody crime scene. It looks like a family's just been murdered, no explanation. But even stranger, a woman is buried in the dirt basement and seemingly completely unrelated to the crime upstairs.
Yeah, and she's not even dirty or anything, which is really the weird part. Like she kind of looks like she just has like pale skin, like she's hasn't been like she just got out of a bath.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the character of Jane Doe is a very interesting in the dynamic that it takes throughout the movie. But yeah, it's almost like she's buried in dirt, but she's immune to the dirt. It like doesn't stick to her, doesn't taint her. She just
It's not dirty. Right.
comes out clean. We meet Tommy and Austin, their father-son coroners, and we first meet them working on an extremely burnt body that they show their process in graphic detail.
Which I thought was really cool. I thought it was interesting how like they have these like 80s montages throughout the movie of them like working on like doing the autopsies and stuff, and kind of like going through stuff like father and son. It was kind of fun in that sense.
They got music playing in the background.
Yeah, they're just enjoying it. Like, come on, son.
Austin's girlfriend Emma arrives, and they're going to go to the movies. But at the same time they're leaving, the sheriff arrives with the Jane Doe, and he's frustrated and perplexed, and he says he needs a cause of death before morning that night. So Austin reluctantly tells Emma to come back in a couple of hours, and he's going to stay and help his dad.
Yeah.
They set up in there, and it's kind of like their house with the basement separated as their area of work. Unique setup, I thought, but definitely works for the movie. They film their process. They turn on a video camera, and they start documenting all the strange things about Jane Doe. Her eyes are cloudy, indicating she has been dead for quite some time. But there's no rigor mortis at all, which is obviously a contradiction. Her
Yeah,
wrists,
yeah, everything that's wrong with her, like like he has a great metaphor. He says it's like finding a bullet in someone's brain, but there's no bullet wound. So like all of these things are wrong with her, but there's no way to determine like how it even happened.
yes, yeah, that was a great line because it perfectly explains what they're dealing with here. Her wrists and ankles are shattered, but there's no injury to the outside of her wrists and ankles. Her
Right.
tongue is severed. She has one missing molar. There's a string in her mouth, and then a fly crawls out of her nose. And outside, the storm just rages.
Yeah, and like the music they have, like the music starts playing in the background, like it changes to this old '50s song, even though they didn't change the channel.
Yeah, it's a great setup. It's like you can't watch this movie and be at this point and not be intrigued because there's no answers to all these questions,
Right, which
and
is
you're
one
and
thing
you're
I love about
just
the movie.
anticipating like, sure, I hope I get answers to what's going on here.
Yeah,
They make the Y cut in her chest, and blood runs out, looks fresh, like a fresh cut in a living
and
person.
it shocks them both because they're like that shouldn't happen. That only happens the first hours someone dies. After that, like that doesn't happen. Like this person was found buried. That should not be happening at all. That blood coagulates. It doesn't run fresh.
Yeah, another contradiction to their circumstance.
Hmm.
They saw out the ribs, and they open her up, and her lungs are black to the degree too much for even a smoker. I think the father says she could have smoked 10 packs a day and been 80 years old, and their lungs wouldn't look this
Yeah,
burnt.
10 packs a day for 30 years, and they wouldn't have been that burnt. And that's when he gives the bullet with the brain metaphor.
Yeah, and she has scars on her heart, which that one got me. Like
That,
is in weird
yeah,
as all the other stuff is. Like, okay, how does that happen?
yes, I thought the same thing because then you start thinking, well, wait a second, was she like ritualistically stabbed in the heart a bunch of times? And I'm starting to kind of put it together in my head a little bit, but there's still no, they're really leaving a lot of room for mystery. I think they did a good job at that.
Yeah. Austin hears a noise upstairs. They're down in the basement. He goes to check it out. Well, Tommy, his father, continues to work. The lights flicker due to the storm, or we think due to the storm, and Tommy accidentally cuts himself pretty bad. Um, Austin is looking into the vent where he hears a noise, and he sees something and falls off the chair he's up on. His dad comes to see what's going on, and they go in and get it, and it is their cat, completely mangled but still alive. And Tommy puts it out of his misery. He snaps its neck, and then he takes it to the crematorium and fires up the oven, which I thought was a great, just a reminder, like a cool part of the story to remind you that we have a crematorium here.
Yeah, that's a good point. And like also how quick they're able to deal with these kind of things. Like they have that emotional intelligence where it's like, well, the cat's dead, we got to burn it. Like there was no kind of like sobbing over it. Like they kind of like that's the business they're in.
They pull a couple clues. Jane Doe has peat all over her, in her hair, on her skin, and Jimson weed in her stomach, which is a paralyzing agent. And the storm worsens. It's getting
Yeah,
really bad outside.
moonflower, something they call it.
Yeah. One thing I first thought as that storm worsened, you're hearing reports on the radio of how epic the storm is. I said, why wouldn't Austin call Emma and cancel? Tell her not to come
That's
back. It's bad outside. You need to, just stay home. We'll go to the movies tomorrow.
yeah. I mean, unless he's just so preoccupied, which I mean, he's so preoccupied with what's going on with this weird autopsy. You'd think he would have done that anyways, just because of that. As soon as this stuff started getting weird, I would have just canceled the date. I'd be like, I can't come out tonight.
Yeah. So inside her stomach, they find her missing tooth wrapped in a cloth. And it's like, it doesn't even make sense how it gets there intact. It's not like it was partially digested. It's just in her stomach, which contains tons of acid, and it's just an intact package in there.
Yeah, and they bring that up. They're just like, wouldn't it have like, been wouldn't the stomach acid broken it down? Like, there's no way that's possible.
The radio starts skipping around, plays a ominous warning, and then jumps to a really old song and stays there. As they peel back her skin, they're trying to look at the cloth that the tooth was wrapped in, and it's got some symbols and some things they can't read on it. As they peel back her skin, they see the inside of her skin is marked with all these symbols, almost like a tattoo on the inside. And it's like, okay, none of this is making any sense at this point.
Yeah, and the father even says, he's like, this doesn't make sense. She doesn't even have a broken nail.
Yeah, none of it makes sense. And I'm at this point, I'm more and more intrigued about the explanation, because
Yeah,
I'm assuming they're going to give you some explanation to tie this all up, and I can't imagine what it is. So I think it keeps you reeled in on the interest level.
hmm
All the lights in their lab burst, and they're suddenly in the dark. They get a flashlight and they start to look around, and all of the doors in the morgue are open, and the bodies are gone. They had three bodies in the slide-in, temperature controlled, uh, housing where they put them in. The
Yeah.
doors are open and they're all gone. And it's like, okay, this is about to become a different kind of movie, I guess.
Yeah. I was thinking the same thing. I was like, all right, now they're adding a different layer to the horror of what's going on. So now you're really starting to wonder, like, what this body's power is. Like, is this body have a source of power? Is it some kind of possession thing? Is it like some like golem type thing? Like, I was really kind of thrown off by all of it.
Yeah. Upstairs, outside, a tree has fallen and has basically trapped them in the basement. It's blocked all passage to get the elevator or anything up back to the upstairs. They had when Emma came there, she wanted to see a dead body. So we got this moment where they go ahead and show her, and one of the dead bodies has a bell on its toe, and they tell her it's an old tradition that the mortuary always put a bell on the dead person's toe in case they weren't really dead. If you hear a bell jingling in the middle of the night, you knew to go open the door.
Right.
And as they're telling her that story, they grab his foot and jingle the bell, to scare her.
Yeah.
Well, now we hear the bell on the dead body jingling and walking past the door. And it's like, okay, joke's on you now.
Yeah. Which
Tommy slowly opens the door, and it's kind of dark, and he's peering and he doesn't see anything. And then he's just pulled through the door, like he just yanked, gone.
Yeah.
And knocked to the ground. So Austin comes out and he helps his father up, and they make their way back to the lab. Inside the lab, all the parts that they've removed from Jane Doe have completely decomposed, which I thought was really cool, because they're saying she must have been dead for a long time, but she's perfectly preserved. And now it kind of gives you that indication that outside of the body, no longer preserved. It's like a scene where somebody rapidly ages, like in Indiana Jones, where the person goes from 40 to 1,000 years old.
When they touch the Holy Grail or something like that.
Parts.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So I thought, again, it's like, what is the explanation of all this? It's really interesting.
Yeah. It adds another layer of mystery, because now you're wondering, like, like again, it goes back to like this, like what is the source of this thing's power? Like why is it when this stuff's removed, it suddenly starts to age rapidly? And then I started wondering, well, how old is Jane Doe? Like how old is this thing?
Exactly. They decide they're gonna take her to the crematorium. They're not gonna get the sheriff his answers, but they're gonna be done with her. But the
They
soldier,
don't
the
care.
dead soldiers now prowling the hall, have them locked into their lab.
Yeah.
They decide, you know what? We're going to burn her right here. They pour chemicals on her and throw a match and light her up. And the fire climbs and it goes across the entire ceiling and like basically engulfs the whole room in flame. They end up needing to extinguish all the fires before they die. And there's not a scratch or a char or a mark on Jane Doe.
Not a single thing,
She did not burn at all.
right? Not even a hair singed.
They they make it out of the lab and they get back to the elevator. They're trying to see if they can get the elevator to go up, even though we think it's blocked. And we hear the dead man jingling, the bell jingling. He's approaching them in the entrance to the elevator. And Tommy's got an axe. And as it gets closer and closer, he jumps out and he buries the axe into it. And it turns out to be Emma,
Yeah.
who showed up because she was supposed to.
Yep.
And what they don't explain is how she got down if they can't get up. But Emma's now dead.
Yeah. Well, I imagine it was some kind of supernatural thing that's keeping them in there, right? So like maybe it allowed her to get down. Like, yeah, she's coming. Let me unlock this door supernaturally. And then when
They're
she's down
upset,
there,
of
they
course.
lock it.
Yeah, they're upset. They hit the button to go up the elevator, but the power goes out and they're not going anywhere. At this point, we see the crematorium turn on all by itself, and the door opens, filling the entire downstairs with smoke. They forge their way back to face Jane Doe through the smoke, and they do a little experiment. They open up her skull and they take a piece of her brain and put it under a microscope, and they find cellular activity still going on. Her brain is still alive.
And then, yeah, the father says, well, that's why we couldn't find the cause of death because she still appears to be alive.
So they start to fold the cloth and try to look at the symbols and try to read into that a little bit closer. And they find a quote from Leviticus, and they piece together that, you know, the clues of the peat and the Jimson weed. The father had already said she's from the Northeast. She's not from around here. Well, now they figured out she's from 1693 New England, and they figure she was part of the Salem witch trials, where, as we've learned historically, they were wrong. They tortured this girl as a witch, but she's actually innocent. And in their torture and in their process to eliminate a witch, they actually created one where she feels all the pain and everything that's perpetrated on her and appears dead, but she feels it all. And she's still suffering to this day, and she wants revenge.
Yeah, and somehow she has those witches' power to inflict pain on other people.
Well, with this realization, Tommy offers himself to her. Like take your vengeance on me, spare my son. And immediately his wrists and ankles just start snapping and turning to complete mush inside.
Yeah, you can see everything's happening to him now.
And you see her body starts to heal. He had split her wide open. It's now sealing up.
All the blood's returning. Yeah.
It's reversing the process, and her agony is being inflicted on Tommy. So it's funny. We saw Tommy put the family cat out of its misery, and now Austin is prepared to do the same thing. And he takes a knife and he finishes his father. He kind of puts him out of his misery from all the suffering he's going through. which kind of gives you perspective on the suffering that Jane Doe has gone through, because he's just suffered it for a matter of moments, and she suffered it for years. And it's overwhelming when you think about that kind of agony prolonged.
Yeah, I go right back to the serpent and the rainbow with the guy paralyzed with the eye, and even though he can feel it. And I saw that when I was younger. I'd always think of these kinds of types of horror as being like a form of like endless hell. Like being able to feel pain and you can't do anything or react to it, I think is just like one of the ultimate forms of torture.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. So he kills his father, and then he hears the sheriff's voice, and he goes out and he climbs up a scaffolding. He's going to try and find his way out, and he's like, I'm down here, I'm down here. And it was a hallucination. It was all a trick. He turns, and his dead father's corpse is face to face with him, and he staggers back, falls through a railing, and falls to his death.
Yeah.
So it's funny, we're immediately taken back to the opening scene, because the next morning the police do arrive, and they have Emma in the hallway with an axe in the middle of her. They have Austin, crashed to the ground. They have a broken and stabbed Tommy. And they have another just completely unexplained carnage in this house.
Yeah, and Burke the cop's like, I've known this family 20 years. There's no way they would have done this. Like, he's like, I'm not buying any of
Yeah.
this.
But of course, no one has an explanation, because all of these things don't make any sense. But he says, they're like, well, what do you want to do with the body? And he's like, I want her out of this county. So get her out of my county. I want to transfer.
I like
that. Take her here. And he names some guy who must have a reputation for being obnoxious or whatever. Like, take him to him. I want her out of my county.
And then you kind of get the idea that this has been happening for 300 years, because that's how she went from New England to where she is. And then they're just going to keep moving her.
Yeah, exactly. So next we see Jane Doe's body loaded into a transfer van. A driver gets in, takes off down the road. As he's going down the road, the radio turns itself on, makes some squawky noises, and lands on a super old song that we may have heard before when the radio was going glitchy. And as the camera pans back out, like it's coming out of the back of the van, we just see her one toe twitch. And that's the end of the movie. And
Yeah.
I thought it was a great ending.
Yeah.
I had seen this movie before, and I actually really enjoyed it both times I saw it. And even the scene it the second time, I didn't remember the answers to all the puzzles. So I got to really be fascinated again. This is a really cool movie. I think it does exactly what it's trying to do. It's clever. It's got some good gore. It makes you think, and it's got a really good payoff.
Yeah, I think it's one of my favorite twists on the Salem witch trials. It's one of the most clever twists I've ever seen on it. Because you don't see it coming. They don't make it obvious, and then they have a really cool twist. I was kind of jealous. I was like, I wish I wrote something like that. It was really good. I really enjoyed it all the way to the very end.
Yeah, same. Very, very creative, very clever movie. Acting was great. Effects were solid. Everything, it was exactly where it needed to be. I gave that one a big thumbs up.
Yeah, big thumbs up. I want to watch it again with some other people. I'll recommend it and see if I can check it out again.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that is our show for this week. Speaking of writing something, I feel like we're in the middle of a story, because we're podcasting about dark, stormy night horror movies in the middle of a dark, stormy night. I feel like that's like a setup for, something's going to happen as soon as we log off now. But maybe we'll write that.
Yeah.
All right, that is our show for this week. We are the Weekly Horoscope. We appreciate you listening or watching wherever you find us, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone.
Your Weekly Horoscope with Jerry and Matt.